The issue is the implications of global trends for Africa. So what I'm going to talk about is what I see as the trends that will have a bearing on the planet, and in particular to Africa, that will build up for the second half of this century. There's a lot of things to look at with regard to the current economic crises and things like that that have spillover effects, and Tendai, I think, will touch on some of those. And there's great resources provided to you in terms of some of the readings that are included within the packages that you have, as well as on the global net. But a couple of things that I want to talk about before I speak about the specific trends. And I won't speak about all of the trends. There's just too many out there. But I'm going to talk about the big ones. But there's some themes that we all have to take into consideration, and particularly you all, as you look at the future for your institutions and your countries and the continent. What I'm finding is that everything is increasingly connected. But that doesn't mean that things are getting smoother. And that cross-cultural interconnectedness leads to friction. There seems to be more and more of that. There was a view back in the 90s that when the web and the internet were coming out and people were talking about the term globalization, that globalization would be a leavening. They would bring humanity together in a common cause. And what I find is that globalization did not homogenize humanity. Rather, it accented its heterogeneity. The other thing I'm finding is, while we're finding that diversity is being augmented within the context of globalization, as well as there's interconnectedness, these two things are contradictory. And that's one of the biggest themes you're going to find in these trends, is that they contradict each other. And as a result of that contradiction, they pose problems and challenges for leaders. I think one of the basic themes that I've seen as a result of the global trends in terms of technology and communications is that the voice of the individual is louder and broader today than ever before, and will increase. You know, in Hyde Park in London, there's Speaker's Corner. And you can go there and anyone can stand there and say whatever they want. And some people say some crazy things, and the only people that hear them are the people that are walking by. Now you have YouTube. And YouTube is global. And any person with any issue now has a global podium. Hyde Park is now the planet. And Speaker's Corner is everyone's desktop. And so before, where you had the distribution of pamphlets, they now move at nearly the speed of light. The other theme I'm seeing is that change is accelerating, and it's self-compounding. In other words, it's not going to slow down. It's going to get faster. There is velocity in this. And those that ignore this, those who don't get on this train, will be lost. In terms of the global change, the global trends, there are a few that I think I want to talk about. One is climate change. The second is population dynamics. Third is urbanization. The fourth is something I call connected diversity. Fifth is governance. And the last one is economics and technology. Now, setting aside the whole political, neo-scientific debate about the role that humans are playing on climate change, let's just say that climate change is happening. And it is beginning to have a global impact. Now, it is estimated by the scientists that crisis is estimated when the average planetary temperature rises by 3 degrees Celsius compared to the average that existed on the planet in 1900. A 1.5 degree rise is now considered inevitable. So we're halfway there. The hope is, with all these agreements, that we will be able to limit the temperature change on the planet to 2 degrees. So we'll get 2/3 of the way there. And this is by the end of this century. The consequences of a 3-degree change by the end of this century is considered by many in the scientific community as catastrophic. To give you a sense, there are some individuals out there in the scientific community that say that at a 3-degree change in temperature, this planet can sustain 1.5 billion people. Climate change poses the greatest challenge to Africa because it is exogenous. Africa will react to its effects, but it can do little to affect it. And Africa is the continent that will be have the greatest impact from climate change. Desertification, rising sea levels, stronger storms will press Africa to develop its agricultural sector as quickly and as sustainable as possible. There are solutions to this, but you have to start working on it now. Against this backdrop is the question of population dynamics. The world will reach 9.3 to 9.5 billion people by around 2030, 2050, depending upon how you look at it. And there is a view that the planet's population will stabilize by the end of this century to just under 10 billion people. Where those people are located is what will pose unique challenges for Africa. You heard it before from Chris Fumonyo. Africa is growing rapidly. Its population will double in less than 15 years. It will become the largest pool of labor on the planet, and it will be the youngest continent on the planet as it is today. Against this growth, the developed world will get smaller in terms of population relative to the rest of the planet. The developed world will need to rely on immigration to maintain increasingly constrained social systems, national production and productivity, and their own domestic markets. Africa's population, as I mentioned, is expected to double, and it will continue to be the youngest population on the planet, with a median age currently of 19.5 years. Now, the African continent is also going to be juxtaposed to an aging and shrinking, in terms of population, Europe. Europe is going to need Africans to maintain its prosperity. The population dynamics will affect the character and discourse of Pan-African politics and relations. For example, by 2050, Nigeria is estimated to become the 3rd most populous country on the planet, surpassing the United States. Okay? What is that going to do for the dynamic within Africa, within the AU, with such a populous country? It's already the largest economy, double the size of South Africa's, and 1 in 4 Africans is a Nigerian right now. What does that mean for the future? And that's just one country. There are 54 countries on the continent, let's not forget. So you have this thing of climate change and population dynamics, and then you have the issue of urbanization. And the global population will be an urban one. City life will be the norm, and fewer people will live in rural communities. And throughout human history, urbanization has had tremendous impact on the human condition and on prosperity. But I have to stress, this is an uneven process. Urbanization, particularly rapid urbanization, results in challenging social, ethnic, and security dynamics for local governance. And the impact of urbanization on traditional societies and culture historically has been relatively negative. Rural traditions evaporate with urbanization. What this means then is that municipal administration and infrastructure will be tested in a fashion unknown in human history. The character and quality of urban life will also be a factor. And rapidly growing cities in the developing world will not be the El Dorados of prosperity, but will be slums. Municipal planning is a critical element for all countries as we go into the second half of this century. Connected diversity. The movement of people in the past meant a loss of connection to their places of origin, their countries of origin. It required levels of autonomy to corporate management and international diplomacy. And I remember this myself. When I went to my first African assignment in Malawi in the late 80s, I wrote telegrams back to Washington. I never phoned home. There was no email. I wrote something called a letter that you put with a stamp on it and you mailed it. You know, you got an answer back about a month, 2 months later. The technological revolution in communication information systems has completely changed the dynamic of internal and external migration. There's something I like to call, they call it in time, the butterfly effect, where you do something in one place and it affects something somewhere else. Now this occurs now at the speed of an electron. Markets, schools, universities, businesses, scientists, governments, and social groups now interact in an increasingly hyper-dynamic fashion. Coupled with the demographic changes occurring around the world, the internet allows for the dispersion and sharing of ideas, both good and bad, useful and crazy. It is also creating a demand for nearly instantaneous response. And this affects the decision-making process. We all know this. Someone would write you a letter in the past and you got it and you would think about it and you would write it and you draft a response and they would get it in a week or two later and you had time to think about it. Now someone sends you an email from China to your home at 2 o'clock in the morning and they expect you to answer it at 3 o'clock in the morning. This has an effect on the decision-making process, and it's getting shorter and increasingly complex. This also has a bearing then on the next issue of governance. And governance is gaining a stronger voice among local communities. The technological savvy individual can now affect political change with very little physical investment. Pluralities can engage majorities in a manner unseen in human history. And urbanization, population dynamics, and the interconnectedness suggest that municipal administration will be very important. The age of mayors may be ascendant, and the ability of national governments to directly manage their citizens will diminish. Economics and technology. I'm not speaking about technology specifically because who knows what's going to be invented tomorrow. Capital requirements are increasing for each successive wave of countries that are seeking to move from being a lesser developed country to a medium income country. It's getting more expensive to uplift an economy because a greater level of capital is needed. And when I talk about capital, I'm talking about human capital, financial capital, material. Raising productivity, both in labor, capital, and that issue of what they call total factor productivity, which means innovation, is critical. But how is this done? Nobody really knows. The last part, TFP. Education tied to innovation is an important element. Technological innovation has spurred productivity around the world, particularly in manufacturing. And that's a good thing. However, in the second half of the century, and what we're already beginning to see now, is that the gains in manufacturing productivity has started to realize a drop in global manufacturing employment. It takes less people to make things, and it's going to take fewer people to make things. Manufacturing productivity is outpacing production. The world moved from an agricultural to industrial societies in the early 20th century. In the first half of the 21st century, it is moving from manufacturing to services, and this poses unique challenges for developing countries. Technological innovation is increasing at an ever-accelerating rate. Those societies that host this innovation, those that are on the vanguard, will see prosperity increase. Note, I said societies and not countries. Wealth or income distribution, frankly, is becoming more unequal, even within the most developed countries and economies, such as the United States. Some reflect that this is like the Gilded Age of the 19th century. Now, this should give us some pause, because The Gilded Age also fostered significant social upheaval and polarization that eventually led to 2 world wars. That's not a good thing. The technological innovations of the next half of the 21st century will be the stuff of science fiction in terms of transportation, medicine, robotics, nanotechnologies, and artificial intelligence. How will the benefits of this brave new world be distributed? That's the fundamental question for the second half of this century. To give you a sense of the challenges and the dichotomy and the complexity, in the second half of this century, the human species will become an interplanetary species in all likelihood. We will put people on Mars. At the same time, we're affecting our climate on our planet so that we may make it more difficult to live on Earth. How do we manage these issues? These all pose unique challenges, some would say threats. And Africa will be severely affected. How do we set ourselves for success in the second half of this century? Thank you very much.